Hi everybody, welcome to IndyCar on the 18th of June 2019. Today's show is about sovereignty. The news at the moment is very muddled and there's an awful lot of it. So rather than just reporting the news today, we're going to go through a few things which I think will help to clear up the issue of sovereignty between both Scotland and England. Now, I don't know about you, but every now and again I will do something crazy like listen to the Reith Lectures on Radio 4. And the Reith lecturer this year is actually a former judge, a guy called Sumption, right? Lord Sumption. Great name, isn't it? Sumption. Anyway, Lord Sumption was giving a series of 5 lectures on law and politics and the relationship between the two. And today he was talking about the idea of written and unwritten constitutions, and he was pointing out that the UK, or Britain as he referred to it, is the only country in the world which still doesn't have a written constitution. And he was putting forward ideas for why that might be, but the primary one was that in the UK and in England primarily, the Parliament, in other words Westminster, is sovereign. That's what they say, that Westminster is the ultimate arbiter of everything in the UK. They're in charge of everything, everything goes through them. Not even the Queen is sovereign over Parliament in Westminster. So that's the basic assumption, that Sumption is operating under. And he pointed out something else which I think I would take violent issue with him over, and that was that as a sovereign Parliament, the United Kingdom's government or Parliament, whatever you want to call it, in Westminster, had the right to legislate on all matters, including devolved matters in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. In other words, he was saying that their Parliament, the English Parliament, was able to overrule any devolved laws that had been previously agreed between England and Scotland, England and Wales, England and Northern Ireland. They were able to, at any point, completely barge in there and completely change the laws without by your leave, without asking permission, without any consultation whatsoever. And this is his assertion that that's the case. Now I want to challenge that today, here and now, because one of the problems with Sumption's assumption is that Sumption's assumption works on the basis that only English law applies in the United Kingdom. And this is where the whole thing collapses. Because we have a union of 2 countries with 2 legal systems. And during their negotiations to form a union in 1707, both countries agreed to certain terms. And one of those terms was that Scottish law would continue in perpetuity. English law would continue in perpetuity, and neither law could usurp or overpower the other. Now that means that any decisions taken in Scotland's devolved Parliament, cannot be changed by English law. Simply because their Parliament is sovereign does not give them the right to change Scottish laws, and they know this. They can maybe change some of the terms, or they could maybe object or obstruct some of the changes in some of the laws, but they cannot legislate over the top of them, because that would be a direct breach of the Acts and Treaties of Union, which specify at the beginning that English law does not apply in Scotland, and vice versa, Scottish law does not apply in England. Also, in the Acts of Union, the 2 parliaments sat in the same chamber, but they were not unified. The Scottish Parliament sat as a part of the Westminster Parliament, but it was never formally absorbed into it. Didn't become part of the Westminster furniture. It's not a part of the Westminster system. The Scottish MPs who sit in that Parliament do so as representatives of the Scottish Government. And the Scottish Government also sits in Holyrood. So as well as the 129 MSPs that we have in Scotland, we also have 59 Scottish MPs at Westminster. And the situation was never resolved. The English Parliament never thought it would be necessary to draw up a deal which made Scottish MPs part of the English system. And therefore, that was never resolved. The English politicians assumed that because they always would outnumber the Scots, that the Scottish MPs who were there to represent the interests of Scotland could easily be overruled, and therefore they could never gain any kind of power or authority. And that has been the case until now. For 300 years, England has overwhelmed Scotland just by sheer weight of numbers of MPs. But, and this is the important point, in law, Scotland's Parliament has never been merged with England's. It just isn't. It sits there as, you know, a bunch of people in the Westminster Parliament, but they are not there as part of the sovereign Westminster system. They are part of the Scottish system, and they're representing Scottish people under Scottish laws. And when Sumption said that the British government or the English government could legislate on any matter, even devolved matters, he's wrong, because it's never been tested in an international court. And this is part of the problem. When Tory MPs have said that they will not allow Scotland to have another referendum, what they're really saying is, we believe that we are sovereign and we can tell you what to do. They're wrong. They can't tell Scotland what to do, because Scotland has two founding documents, both of which guarantee the right of Scottish voters to decide how they're governed. And that means Scottish voters are sovereign and English Parliament is sovereign. English voters are not sovereign, their Queen isn't sovereign. But this bunch of idiots who run England are apparently above the law and can do whatever the hell they like. People in Scotland, different. We elect our representatives and they're accountable to us. We can remove them at any point. And under our constitutional documents, which England doesn't have incidentally, we have a constitutional document which is called the Declaration of Arbroath from 1320. And we have another document more recently from last year called the Claim of Right. And the Claim of Right is a guarantee under both English and Scottish laws that Scottish people are sovereign and have the right to determine the form of government best suited to their needs. Now that means they can throw out an English government, they can refuse to be part of the Union, they can do anything they like. We, as Scots people, can decide how we want to be run. This is something which English people do not have the right to do. So here is the problem. When Brexit happens, which it will, and we now know that 63% of Conservative Party voters are happy for Scotland and Northern Ireland, even Wales, to break away from the United Kingdom and leave England on its own to Brexit. 63% of Tory voters, Tory donors, Tory members were happy to see Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales depart from the United Kingdom if it means they get Brexit. And they are prepared to sacrifice the Union for Brexit. Now this is interesting. The Tories in Scotland claim to be the Conservative and Unionist Party. In England they still call themselves the Conservative and Unionist Party, and yet their membership is not Unionist. Their membership is happy to break up their own union so they can have Brexit. And this means that when it comes to it, when Boris Johnson is finally crowned the king of Brexit land, and he tries to push through Brexit, and he fails at the European Union to get a deal because he's using these bullying tactics and not paying bills and things like that. So it's all bully boy, I'm the big Boris Johnson, I'm going to tell you what to do. When that fails, and he faces the Commons to say that they're going to have a no-deal Brexit because of his actions, Parliament is going to say no, we're not going to have a no-deal Brexit, and that means there's chaos. Boris Johnson would need to go to the country and have a general election to reinforce his own mandate for a hard no-deal Brexit. And if he did that, he knows that he would lose Scotland. He knows he would probably lose Northern Ireland as well, and he doesn't care. And the people who are going to vote Boris in, they also don't care, because Brexit is now more important to the Tory party than the Union. And this is an interesting new development. The Tories can no longer call themselves the Conservative and Unionist Party. They're now the Conservative and Brexit Party. They're even happy, believe it or not, to merge with the Brexit Party, these Tories, and have Nigel Farage as the Prime Minister or the leader. That's how divided England has become. And when all of this happens, when Scotland does either have a referendum and vote for independence rather than have this, or we win a general election on an independence mandate and become an independent state, whatever happens, the English state cannot fail to recognise it, because A, they've precipitated it, B, Scotland has tried its best to stay in the Union and to stay in the EU and has not been allowed to do so. And then we get to the point where we have a referendum which England claims it's not going to recognise the result of. We can take that to court, because none of this stuff about sovereignty has ever been tested. Not legally, it's never been tested. England's the only country in the world with no constitution, therefore it has no basis on which to argue its sovereignty, because it has no constitution that says it's sovereign. It's just the Tories, if they say something, then it must be so. And that isn't the case. That's not a legal basis for a country. Scotland has 2 founding documents which guarantee the sovereignty of its citizens, not its government. Its citizens have the full power to decide how the country is run and to elect those people who they wish to run the country, and to decide where their parliament sits and whether it's in a union with another country or not. So no matter what you hear on the news from the Tory party, from the BBC, ITV, STV, anybody, doesn't matter what it is, if they're telling you that Scotland can't have a referendum or can't vote for independence or cannot become independent without England's permission, they're wrong, because it's not being tested. The legal sense of independence has never been tested in an international court, and there is no higher court than the European Court of Justice, because the European Court of Justice is above party politics, and it's also even above national politics. It will decide this based on international laws laid down by the United Nations over many, many years and abided by every other country in the world. England does not stand a chance if they try to block independence. And remember, the Tories want Scotland to move away and allow them to Brexit. So how are they going to reconcile that? How are they going to say we're not going to let Scotland go when 63% of the Tory party wants Scotland to go? They don't want Scotland to stay if it means losing Brexit. Okay, end of rant today. So that's the situation we're in. The Tories are in a complete bind because their own party members want Scotland to separate so that they can have Brexit. And they have built this mess themselves, with all the misinformation, with all the propaganda, with all the Scotland the beggar nonsense, and all this stuff about us being subsidy junkies. English people want rid of us now. They want rid of us so they can have their Brexit. Well, great. We're happy to leave them to it. Let's see how Boris Johnson manages to square that circle when it comes down to it, because the very people that are voting for Boris Johnson are the very ones who want to break up the union to get Brexit. I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.